everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we are going to over dye some commercially dyed roving. Right here I have some Knit Picks Wool of the Andes roving, which is 100% Peruvian Highland wool. And this is the colorway Wild Rose Heather. Sometimes you can buy bare yarn, but other times you might find another color at a really good price. So overdyeing is a way to turn something you might not be in love with into something completely fabulous. Now, I happen to think that this is a beautiful color to begin with, but I think that we can take it up a notch and have some fun. I think that the heathered quality of this fiber can also lend itself to some beautiful depth while we overdye it. Some of this might not show through in the same way, but it can help lead to another element of variation within our fiber. I have done a lot of overdyeing of commercial colorways when it comes to yarn, but I don't think I've actually tried this on a pre-dyed hank of roving before. So I'm really excited to see what we're going to create. I have added about an inch to an inch and a half of water to my steam pan. And I also added 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. And now I'm going to start laying out this roving, sort of going back and forth. I want to let it be spread out as much as possible, but also I want to have it somewhat evenly arranged in here for the dyeing. And now that I have it sort of laid on top, I am slowly going to start submerging it. Today I have decided to let the roving pre-soak in the pan that I'm going to use for the dyeing. And this will allow me to do a little less manipulation of the fiber. Now, as it's still floating, but as I'm submerging it, you can see that there is a fair amount of water in here. I'm not doing a true low immersion. If I was going for low immersion, there would be just barely enough water to cover up the fiber. And we definitely have more than that. However, I sort of want the dyes that I'm going to mix and add to be able to move a little bit freely and access the fiber versus staying sort of really sharply in one spot. As I'm submerging it, I'm also sort of trying to squeeze the air out of the roving, because if the dye in the water can't access the fibers, then you're not going to end up with color penetrating all the way through. Now, I happen to like the pink, so if some of that shows through, that honestly doesn't bother me too much. But at this stage, you can sort of tell the difference between the areas that are completely saturated because they look way darker than the ones that are still less saturated. So I want to make sure that this has some good time to pre-soak, but it's nice that it's not too compact, and I think that we can create something really beautiful. You do want to make sure when you have wet fiber that you don't handle it too much. If you rub this very much at all, you can end up with a felted edge, which is another reason to pre-soak in the pan where you're going to dye it, because then you're not having to pick up the wet fiber and rearrange it. Now, obviously, I have done that in the past. You can do that. It's just it was a bit easier, I think, for me to lay it out in the way I wanted to in this pan while it was dry and sort of floating. But you could totally pour water on top of it as well. But anyway, I am going to let this pre-soak for at least 30 minutes until we see some really good saturation all around it. I filled 5 cups with half a cup of plain water, and now we're going to mix some colors using the Wilton Color Right Color Performance System. These are liquid drops that are really concentrated and are great for dyeing yarn. I'm wearing gloves so that way I do not dye my hands at all. But let's mix up some colors. Let's do a nice teal. We'll do 8 drops of blue. 2, 3. 8 drops of blue and 2 drops of yellow. You can sort of see as I drop this just how viscous these liquid drops are. Yeah, this gives us a nice teal color. And so what, that was 10 drops of food coloring, and that's pretty concentrated. I'm gonna go ahead and mix a blue with just 8 drops. And let's do a black, also with 8 drops. 3, 4. And let's do sort of a periwinkle. We'll do 2 drops of blue. 1, 2, and 2 drops of pink. Whoops. Now, the base yarn that we're using today is pink. So when we mix something like this that is like a periwinkle blue, it's gonna get more red in it as we add things to our yarn. So here is just the straight blue compared to our teal. And actually, this is looking fairly similar to this one that we had just mixed, but this one has a lot less food coloring in it, so I think it should look sufficiently different. And the black tends to read sort of blue and purple, but let's do, What's nice about this system is that since there are some recipes, it gives you sort of a nice starting point, I guess, for your colors. I like that shade, but let's do more of a green because we can see how this will show up on our pink. So let's do 10 drops of yellow. And 1 drop of blue. And this just shows that if you really want a lime green, the blue is a lot more potent than the yellow because this gave us sort of a grass green versus a lime green. But now I'm going to take some paper towel swatches, dip it into these colors so we can see a little bit about what they are. Here is our palette that we're working with today. I took some dry paper towels and dipped it into the colors so that way we could get a sense of what we're working with. Now the other thing that this does is it gives us a sense of how the colors might break. For example, in the black you can see some more black and then this blue halo. And even on the teal, we see something sort of like Wilton, when we break Wilton's teal, that we've got a more blue edge at the top. These two blues look very similar, even though one has red in it, the other does not. But you know, we'll see how they look on the roving itself. The roving has pre-soaked, and I'm now setting it across 2 burners of similar size. You can see that there is plenty of water in the container to cover it. I'm now going to turn on the 2 burners into sort of a medium heat to start heating things up so that way when we add the food coloring, the dye can set to the yarn. given that the burners are in 2 locations, we won't get even heat throughout, but by sort of tipping the pan a bit, we can mix the water a bit. And so we'll heat this until we start to see a little bit of bubbles, or it starts to feel pretty hot. All right, you can see we're not seeing any bubbles, but we are warm. We're seeing a lot of steam on our steam pan. And so now I'm going to start adding some dye, and I'm literally just going to pour with this cup. So that's the green, and I poured it, and then I'm going to use a slotted spatula to sort of bring that color through that region. And again, I'm not sure how good of color penetration we will get. We could have some pink in the inside, but if I didn't poke it, then there's no way that the color would be able to move around there at all. And of course, some of it could be underneath and shifting through down there, and that is also okay. So next I've got the teal, which again, I'm sort of pouring over the edge. And again, I'm going to take my little spatula and sort of work it through the fiber. You know, I am poking the roving. I'm not rubbing it, I'm just poking it. I have personally found that when you're in the most danger of felting your roving is when you are, you tend to have the most danger of the roving actually felting when you're washing it. But yeah, I think that there's going to be some pink showing through this green. There's still a lot of color in there. I did add the vinegar to this before I added the colors. And I did that so that way, I added the vinegar to the water first so that way it would be nicely mixed. But here is our black. Squeeze bottles can make this a little easier because it would give you a little more control. You can add stuff slowly. You can see I'm sort of poking this, spread it out a bit. Again, I'm not sure if this is going to go through to the bottom, but I don't mind actually if some of the pink shows through. And you can kind of, well actually I guess it's a little hard to know if it's the black that we're seeing or if it's the pink that we're seeing through, or if it is some of the red from the black that we're seeing there. But you do see some of the color is spreading out and spreading through. I have 2 colors left, but I think I am going to give this, I don't want to mix things up too much. I still have the 2 blues left. I'm going to go ahead and give this 5 minutes. You can cover it with tin foil if you would like, which actually I think that I might do. So I'm going to go ahead and cover this with tin foil, wait 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and add the last 2 colors. Turns out my foil wasn't quite wide enough to go all the way across, so I have just sort of laid it on top like so to help keep some of the heat in with our fiber. It has been 5 minutes. Whoa! That wasn't quite what I expected. The colors spread out a lot. Oh, that is funny. And actually, you can see there's still a lot of color in here that has not yet absorbed. I'm going through and I'm poking the rest in, and I don't think I'm going to add those blues. I don't think that I need to. Wow. Okay, so that's the teal. We've got the green. Wow, that spread out a lot. I'm really curious. It's hard to not move it and poke too much, but this is not what I expected. I think that with this amount of vinegar, if it were yarn, these colors would have struck already. But we're also using more blues and yellows versus reds, and reds are the colors that tend to strike the fastest. Let's see. I mean, that's definitely warm. I can place my fingers in there, but I wouldn't want to do that for very, very long. But this is warm enough that it should let the colors should bind. I think that I'm gonna go ahead and give this, let's give this about maybe 10. I'm gonna give this another 5 minutes, and then I'll come back, and if there's still a lot of color left in solution, at that point, then I will add some more vinegar. It's been 5 minutes. When I turned up the heat and added these covers back on, I heard pretty quickly the sound of bubbles. But it looks like that the colors aren't really spreading that much further than where they have already landed, so that's good. But there's still a lot of color here. A lot of color. I wonder if there's stuff like trapped beneath. Yeah, you can see that it's sort of simmering a bit. I'm reducing the temperature even more. But I'm now going to go ahead and add some more vinegar. And I wish that there was a little bit of an easier way for me to add it evenly around, but I'm going to sort of sprinkling it on. 1, whoops, that's about 2, 3, and 4. There is, I guess what, I've added maybe about 30 drops total of this Color Right food coloring, which is a reasonable amount for 100 grams of yarn. You know, it's a lot of food coloring, but I am expecting that this color should absorb. But anyway, we've added the more vinegar. It's mostly on the surface, but it should, I mean, we do know some diffusion is happening because we could see it. But I'm going to cover this back up and come back in 10 minutes and we'll see what is going on with the residual food color. It has been 10 minutes. Pull off my foil. You can see that we're not at a boil. That's really, really good, but it's still super steamy. And it's not looking super teal anymore. I'm still seeing a bit of blue. That one is definitely reading a bit teal. And we're getting more, it's funny, we've got more and more yellow in the pan as we come down here. At this stage, I am going to turn off the heat. I know that there's plenty of vinegar in here for things to absorb. Honestly, it might take time. Time for things to sort through, but we also could have saturated this with the amount of dye the yarn will absorb. Sometimes yarns that have been dyed and fiber that's been dyed commercially already, you can add a lot of food coloring in it to try to get it to add a bunch more color, but it just won't absorb as much color as you would think that it could. And part of that is at some point there's a limit to what your yarn, or in this case our roving, can absorb. So I'm going to leave it uncovered. The heat is off and we're going to let this cool off. And as it cools, the roving will absorb some more color. So I will come back once we're no longer steamy and it has cooled a bit and we'll check on it again. Right, it's been a little time and the color, there's still some color in here, but there's some areas where it is looking clear. Okay, there's a brighter pocket. I think that because the fiber is a lot more spread out, it might actually, I mean, in my experience, it seems to take a little longer for the colors to absorb to the roving than it does if it were yarn. And I think that maybe it's because it's a little easier to move the yarn around so that way you can get the dye access to the surface than it is with roving. But anyway, this is still, let's see, I can comfortably touch the pan, but it's still pretty warm. So I'm still gonna wanna let this cool as much as possible before I remove the fiber. But I think it's almost cool enough for me to remove it from the stovetop and place it elsewhere. I let the roving cool completely in the pan. You can see that most of the color is in the fiber, but there is a bit of bleeding. I am going to carefully lift this and gently squeeze out some of the liquid. You do not want to rub. Rubbing the fiber will lead to felting, and that is not what you want. I am now going to carefully place this into just some room temperature tap water behind me. So again, we do not want to squeeze this too much because you can see the fibers can stick to your hands a bit. I'm just very gently squeezing. And I find for getting water out, actually, you can use an old towel and roll it up to, again, gently squeeze out the excess dye. We have some bleeding here, but I would say try to get so there's no bleeding. If there's still a little bit, let your roving dry, spin it, and then worry about washing it, because the fibers are stronger when they're spun and you have less of a melting risk. So you don't want to run the water over the fiber. You know, the less agitating the better, but that's already looking fairly clear. I am going to add the tiniest amount, maybe the size of not a half a grape or something, of dish soap. So you can see that, you know, we've got a tiny bit of bubbles. Sometimes I'll add it under the running water. Not quite sure why I didn't do that today. And I am carefully rinsing it. I found that I can be a little rougher than what I'm demonstrating, but I want to emphasize the care today because I think that some people have ended up with felted fiber, and you know, that's not our goal. So off to the side, I'm just gently squeezing out the water. I'm going to fill this up and I'm going to add the roving. And I think that this might be my last rinse. You know, and the rinsing is for two purposes. If there's a massive amount of bleeding, then it could be worthwhile to use, rather than this basin, a sink full of water to rinse it carefully. But all I know is that this method works for me, and I usually end up with fiber that is spinnable. One other reason I like to use these basins because they work nicely for filming, but they also don't have anything sharp on them where the fibers can catch. Whereas if I was just in the sink, then it could catch on the drain and I could pull it. So, either way, okay, so gently moving that through. And yeah, I would say we still have a hint, the barest hint of color. It's less than it was before. I'm going to call it. I am gently squeezing out some of this water. And now I'm going to take this roving and hang it up to dry. I'm going to spread it out as much as possible on the drying rack so that way, you know, nothing will get moldy or mildewy, which thankfully is not also a problem that I haven't had personally. But I will be back once this is dry and I'll show you the colors on our fiber. But oh, I haven't even mentioned, where's that pink? I think that we successfully covered up that pink, but I do see some hints of it running through the fiber. So I'm excited to talk about that at our conclusion. Here is the finished overdyed roving, and where did my pink go? You almost cannot tell that this was pink to begin with. Of course, if you look at the colors that I mixed and the color of the yarn, you might think something is up. And there are some places, like in through here, where you can see a tiny bit of the pink come through. But some of this is actually really cool, and I think it's because of the heathered quality of the original yarn. And so you get these sections that you almost see a pink heathering through it, which I think is just awesome. If we zoom in, you can see that this pink sort of runs through in streaks instead of splotches. So it really is coming through as a heathering, especially in some of these areas with less dye penetration. Even in the darker section, you don't necessarily see the pink, but there is a bit of a heathered quality. These colors have depth and dimension and aren't monotone, if that makes sense. Even in the green, you can see some patches that are a bit more reddish in there. And I think, again, this has to do with the heathered nature of the original roving. There's some things about being mostly self-taught that mean that you might not do things properly. I have yet to end up with a roving that I've dyed that is not spinnable. But I know that this is something that is a concern for many of you. And I think that one of the things I look for is, you know, it looks a little clumped and there is some disorganization of fibers on the outside. But can I easily pull this apart? If I can super easily and with minimal effort pull this apart and fluff it, it is not felted. You can see the fibers are all running in one direction. It's, you know, perfectly spinnable. And I think it would draft and spin with ease. For me, the places that are in the most danger of getting felted are these tips at the end. But I think if you take care and try to avoid squeezing and agitating it as much as possible, then you'll be in good shape. If you are going to be spinning your roving yourself, you can always wait and spin it and then do some washing. So if there's a lot of bleeding or if there's a lot of light bleeding, but it's not enough to really be getting on your hands or anything like that, then, you know, wait and do the rest of the rinsing once the yarn is spun, because the risks of felting go down significantly once you're in yarn versus unspun fiber. There we go. I just crocheted this very loosely into a bit of a crochet chain. And I like to store the roving that way. I think it keeps it a bit safer. I'm not sure if I would have picked this burgundy, mossy green, and turquoise sort of just out of a pot to combine together. However, I think it really works. And there's something very fall about this, and I think it's rich and lovely. It's something to keep in mind when you're overdying, that the colors you mix are not the way that they're going to look on your yarn. However, the darker you mix your colors, the more likely you are to sort of overcome the hue that's in the yarn that you're overdying. I don't currently have any roving in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy store. However, I do have some hand-dyed and hand-spun yarn listed for sale. And so if you would like to bring home a little piece of some hand-dyed, hand-spun yarn from ChemKnits, you can find a link in the video description. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and if you are interested in supporting this YouTube channel on a more personal level, check out the ChemKnits Patreon. Patreon is a platform where fans can support the creators they enjoy, and in exchange you can get some really cool perks. In my Patreon, I offer early access to a new dyeing video every month. You can also choose at different reward levels exclusive behind-the-scenes sneak peeks for new content before I've even edited it and released it. You can get advance notice of the shop restocks and even some coupons, some permanent coupons, so you can always get a discount off of the yarns that I dye. If you would like to learn more about becoming a ChemKnits patron, you can find a link to the Patreon in both the video description or in the iCard. Thank you so much for watching.